Welcome to the Dr. America Show. My name is Sanjeev Sriram. I am your host, and I am very excited for our pilot episode of the Dr. America Show. I want to thank the wonderful team, awesome team over at We Act Radio for embarking on this journey with me and with you guys, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Sanjeev Sriram. I'm a pediatrician, and just to give you guys a little bit about my background, I went to medical school at UCLA and did my residency there in pediatrics. I went on from there to get my public health degree from the Harvard University School of Public Health through the Commonwealth Fund's Fellowship in Minority Health Policy. And I graduated from that in the summer of 2009, just as the battle for health reform was kicking up. I moved to Washington, D.C. and joined the National Physicians Alliance to make health reform as progressive as possible in that political climate. And after the bills became law in the Affordable Care Act, I went back to practicing general pediatrics here in Southeast Washington, D.C., and I still see patients here. I'm very proud to serve this community. I love working here, and I'm really excited to join We Act Radio to bring you the Dr. America Show. And this show, what we really are hoping to do for you guys is have some really good conversations, some really insightful discussions about health policy and health. I'm excited that we can use this platform to talk about the many dimensions of the Spanish word salud. For those of you who don't know, salud means health in Spanish. It's the technical meaning, and it really does mean health in that biomedical sense of the word. But I've always been intrigued by how salud is also used when somebody's trying to say bless you, to somebody who sneezes or hiccups or coughs. And I think that kind of implies like this connection to spiritual health, which hopefully we can explore that together and talk about how our public health is tied to a web of mutuality. Finally, salud is also used as a toast. It's when people are getting together for drinks, they say cheers, and I kind of want this show to be an exploration of our public health achievements and accomplishments, so that we can look at our current challenges with some optimism based off of the great work that's been done in the past. And so I thank you guys for tuning in. I thank We Act Radio for this amazing opportunity, and I'm excited to embark with all y'all on this journey. So for Dr. America, the Dr. America Show's first pilot episode, we're going to talk about Ebola. It's been in the news. It's been on everybody's mind and at the top of the public health worry agenda for a couple of months now. And I kind of want to take the Ebola discussion and sort of reframe it. I kind of feel that we need to sort of remind ourselves where our concern needs to be. And so we're going to talk a lot about redirecting our concerns to the good people of West Africa, where the disease has been hardest and has been toughest, and has probably been the most devastating. And I think that redirecting our concern to that is going to be our first objective. And then I want to kind of explore the broad range of caution that seems to be coming up around this virus, and where some of that caution is science-based, and where some of that caution is maybe not so much caution anymore, but just fear-based and maybe drifting into paranoia. And maybe even it's fitting into an agenda of contempt for science, for public health. And I'm looking forward to exploring all of that with you guys and in our pilot episode of the Dr. America Show. So thank you very much for tuning in. And when we come back, we're going to have a fascinating interview with Dr. Michelle Nisarenko, who has actually worked in West Africa. Thanks a lot.
You're listening listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
All right. Welcome back to the Dr. America Show. My name's Sanjeev Sriram. I'm your host, and I am really thrilled to start off our conversation with Ebola to talk to a real health professional who has done the hard work in tough parts of the world. Her name is Michelle Nishirenko. Michelle, am I saying that name right?
Michelle
Nishirenko. You're my first guest, and I want to definitely make sure I say your name right, and I'm going to definitely go through this little bio here and introduce you just right for our show and for our listeners. So Dr. Nishirenko is the director of the Global Health Program at Boston Children's Hospital. She's an attending in pediatric emergency medicine, and she is part of the International Pediatric Emergency Medicine team at Brigham and Women's Hospital. She is also on the faculty at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and an instructor at Harvard Medical School. And I just want to point out that that the program that Michelle is part of works to improve child health globally through partnerships for clinical quality improvement, education, research, and advocacy. She has experience in pediatric care and program development in China, Bolivia, Lesotho, Guatemala, Liberia, and Indonesia. In Liberia, she provided pediatric humanitarian aid in the immediate post-conflict setting, partnering local remaining infrastructure to American academic institutions for the last 7 years. Through these partnerships, sustainable programs for a health system rebuilding, including physician education and care for vulnerable children, were developed in Liberia. Her particular areas of research interest are in the provision of emergency care in humanitarian settings, the development of emergency care systems for children, as well as the role of children in humanitarian crises. Michelle, thanks you so much for joining us today to talk about Ebola and about your work and your experiences.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So, I was telling our listeners and viewers that, I really want to help reframe our concern about Ebola so that it's mostly focused on the people of West Africa in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. And I think in order to do that, it helps to put Ebola into a context of West African health. And as devastating as this disease is, it is not a major cause of morbidity and mortality in general for the people of Liberia. Do you mind comparing Ebola with other health problems in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea? It feels like we've heard so much about Ebola for the past few months, but we still don't know much about the kinds of health problems West Africans face.
Certainly. And I think it's important, my main experience has been in Liberia, but this really translates both to Guinea and Sierra Leone as well. Liberia is a small country, as are its neighbors. It's 4.1 million people, of which half are children under the age of 18. And so you have a very large population of children, and many of the killers are the killers of children. And so when we think about malaria, malnutrition, pneumonia, that's half the population of this region. And so the average percentage of malnutrition at any one time in Liberia is about 40% of the population is either too short, underweight, or not growing properly because of food insufficiency. And when we break that down, about 1/10 of the population, 10%, is actually acutely or immediately malnourished in the sense that they need treatment in a facility like a feeding clinic or a hospital. And, when we compare that to the number of Ebola with 10,000 cases in 3 countries with a total of maybe around 16 million people, 10% of that is a far higher number for malnutrition than of Ebola. And so I think it's the comparison of scale is really interesting, and the focus we have. This is obviously something that's a lot more contagious and a lot different than the health systems are used to coping with, and so it's garnering a lot of attention. But I think the important piece is that, in comparison, it is a small percentage of the population. This is a very malaria-heavy region with the most severe kind of malaria that causes cerebral, or the kind of malaria that results in seizures. And, that we treat almost every child who walks through the door has a positive malaria test because the burden is so high.
Wow. So, it sounds like this is a region of the world that was already, struggling, before Ebola. What you're describing are, this really complicated mix of chronic and acute problems. And I think that, it's actually really helpful to understand this, because this is one of the huge differences between comparing Ebola in West Africa versus Ebola in other parts of the world, is that this context is really, really helpful. This particular Ebola outbreak started this past March, but it only seemed to receive serious attention after American aid workers fell ill towards the end of the summer. Can you walk us through a timeline, roughly of what West Africans have been facing with this outbreak? When did this Ebola outbreak start to differentiate itself from previous outbreaks of the Ebola virus?
Yeah, the turning point for this outbreak, I think, was in two different phases. So they traced the original case zero to a child in Guinea as far back as December of 2013, so almost a year ago. And it slowly spread in the region, which is a very rural, isolated region. And that mirrored what has happened before in Democratic Republic of Congo or Uganda. And that's when Medicine Sans Frontières, or MSF, responded and had been in containment and treatment work there since February. The unfortunate piece is that the area in Guinea where it started borders both Liberia and Sierra Leone. It's almost like a triangular intersection. And so it slowly came over the border in March to both Sierra Leone and Liberia. And there was really aggressive containment efforts in Liberia and Sierra Leone in March and in April. And for Liberia, they actually reported no positive cases in the country after May 6th. And so MSF was already worried that this had been a somewhat prolonged outbreak, December through May, for any other prior Ebola outbreak. And then, the concern was at that point it had been a long time, but it seemed like it was improving. The issue is the mobility of the population in that region. There's two major trade routes to come down from Guinea and northern Liberia and Sierra Leone to the ports where goods and food come in. And so, unfortunately, what happened in June is there was enough movement that infected individuals came down into more populated areas of Sierra Leone, but then worse, why Liberia is so disproportionately affected, is infected people came into the capital city of Monrovia in June. And I was actually on the ground in Liberia the month of June when this happened.
Oh, wow. So, this is actually really helpful context. I think that this is the kind of information that, we have completely overlooked in our, discussions and hysteria over Ebola stateside. And, if you can kind of keep going with that, context building, because it sounds like there are different kinds of challenges to public health in West Africa. You gave us a really good perspective on just how young the population is and just what kinds of, health burdens they're carrying. But I'm curious about the kinds of public health infrastructures that you've been, working with over the last several years. From your perspective, did Ebola take advantage of shortcomings or gaps in a still developing or recovering public health system? Or are there other factors that made this outbreak, spread so far and so severely?
Yeah, I think I can give some good background as to why when Ebola hit Monrovia, it sort of set off a fire, so to speak. So Liberia, post-war, only has 50 physicians in the entire country and less than 2,000 nurses.
And Michelle, when you say post-war, for many of us who have not really been paying attention to the history of that part of the world, which war are you referring to?
That would be the end of their own internal civil war, which occurred in the end was 2003.
Got it.
And so in 10 years, they went from post-war 50 physicians maybe 2,000 nurses to only 250 physicians and about 4,000 nurses in 10 years. And so the healthcare worker supply is very low. And so for Liberia, and the government was pretty much crippled by the cost of that war, and rebuilding its GDP and the ability to fund healthcare has been a major focus for the last 10 years, but 10 years is just not enough. And so pre-Ebola, when I was there last fall, what was functioning are the main hospitals in the cities. Every hospital, every district or county has a hospital that functions. And then there's scattered public clinics that the Ministry of Health supports to provide care for the people. But the coverage is not complete for the country, even with the public clinics. And then the country has not been able to afford a community health care worker program nationally, like many other African countries have. And the community health workers are often what serve as that public health workforce that are teaching water and sanitation, that try to contain when diseases crop up in villages or regions, really educate the public, and that doesn't exist in Liberia. And so when disease started spreading, there was no ready workforce like is available in Uganda to take on the issue of containing and tracing.
So, I mean, this is like just staggering to me. I mean, as a pediatrician here, I think that I've been spoiled by working in the kinds of cities and systems that where I don't think that, I mean, the numbers and ratios that you're talking about, I don't know like what I would do if I was faced with that. So I can only imagine that when you have like that struggling of a system, and then you throw something like Ebola on top of it. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah. I mean, in 2010, whenever I arrived in Monrovia, or my colleagues, I work in a large consortium of academic groups, so one of us is always there. And whenever we arrived, we were the only pediatrician in the entire country, because Liberia had none of its own pediatricians until 2010.
Wow. The only pediatricians in the country. And you're describing a country where half the population are children.
Yes. And make sure ward rounds very long.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Oh, wow. So, in terms of the global response to this particular Ebola outbreak, from your, perspective and from your vantage point and the people that you've talked to and your experience on the ground, do you feel that the WHO and other organizations intervened appropriately in terms of their timing and resources, or do you feel like more could have been done? Were there people who you feel were probably, better equipped and better prepared and at responding?
Yeah, I think this is a very complicated response, one like we've never seen anywhere in the world before. And it's always hard to know that's what you're dealing with up front. Mm-hmm. Prior to this outbreak, no other NGO besides MSF was ever providing Ebola care. It was a very specialized response that happened infrequently, small volumes, isolated rural pockets. And so no one else really worked in this highly technical area, because the equipment you would need for Ebola care is far more technical than you need for running your typical even field hospital in a disaster. And so this was a very challenging situation to scale up in, and I think that MSF should be really commended. They raised the alarm early. The issues were, I think, in many different streams. The equipment is technical and in limited supply. Procurement has been a bottleneck throughout, I think, this outbreak. The other piece was, MSF has a limited number of people and equipment, so for them, they scaled impressively well in the number of treatment units they were running simultaneously, but to be able to train other organizations which are now responding, like International Medical Corps, International Rescue Committee, takes a long time. And so for them to open a new operation for Ebola is a slower response than they would even have in a typical disaster, like a flood or a hurricane. And so the bottleneck with institutional ability to manage the disease and the care the disease requires was a new aspect of this response that's never been encountered before. And then additionally, this is a scary disease. Many of us saw Outbreak in the 90s. It has, the quoted mortality rates are high in a lot of places. This outbreak, with the institution of IV therapy, the knowledge that early rehydration orally prevents mortality and death, that we've learned a lot of important things. But again, recruiting volunteers, physicians, nurses, or even recruiting the local nurses, physicians, and sanitation workers required is far more difficult, simply because of the risk. In a typical disaster, you have an earthquake, the earthquake's over, and the danger goes away. This is more like working in a conflict where the danger is there all the time. And in this case, it's worse because you can't see it. And so it's been a bit more challenging, I think, from a human resource perspective, as well as the technical, operational, and procurement. And so with those three bottlenecks, I don't know how this response could have been moved along more efficiently. I think that would take a group of very thoughtful minds who had a lot of foresight in order to plan for this kind of event. But I think the early declaration of a public health emergency, a level 3 emergency, all those steps are really to be commended.
Yeah, and I think that, this is, I just find this, fascinating, because I think that there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking that, that a lot of people stateside, try to do on a situation like this, for whatever intentions they might have. But but I totally agree. I think you're absolutely right that, Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, they really are a commendable organization. I mean, these are people who go to the toughest parts of the world under the toughest of circumstances. And, the technical challenges that you're describing, I think, are very complicated. And I think it's the kind of thing that, for people who don't really deal with infectious diseases and understand the spectrums of, what infectious disease specialists deal with. I think that this is just really fascinating to hear that the team of MSF were not only caring for the people that were suffering from this disease, but they also were training additional volunteers and additional workers to participate and be part of the relief. I think that that's just beyond commendable, and I hope people take the time to visit the MSF website and learn more about these fantastic folks. Coming back to the public health infrastructures in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, and the global health community's work to strengthen those systems, do you feel like this episode with Ebola is revealing chronic problems in the relationships between local and international public health? Or is this, more revealing of acute issues, or is it a mix?
I think it's a mix. But I think one of the most revealing things, if you look at funding distribution across Africa, the different countries, and I'm no funding expert by any means, or in international funding, meaning funding coming from Europe or Australia or the UK. But when I think about our U.S. policies, we often donate through PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Fund for HIV and AIDS Relief. And that money was allocated years ago to designated countries. And so those designated countries receive a lot of funding. If you weren't allocated that funding, you'll never receive funding from that policy. And so, for example, there are no West African countries in the PEPFAR allocation that have Ebola. And so Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea were never part of that. And that's a major funder of public health programs, which are often dovetailed to HIV programs. And so that's a limitation for Liberia. And as somebody who's been working there for the last 7 years, we've often sought funding for expansion, to expand our nurse training, to expand to other hospitals. And it's been a very challenging funding environment because the pots of money are almost pre-allocated at times. And it's not just PEPFAR, but there's other funders which are disease-specific or are looking for a certain level of in-country infrastructure before they're willing to donate. And Liberia, for half of the year, has several roads that are completely impassable, and so part of the country is cut off. And so the infrastructure often scares people away, yet that's what needs the most investment. And so it's a challenge to find a balance between funding what countries need and what donors want to see.
Okay, that's. See, this is I mean, this is definitely the interesting part of trying to help people understand that that I think finances and the way that we fund problems and the people working with those problems. You're right. It is very complicated, and hopefully, I'm hoping that this episode with Ebola maybe teaches us and gives us some lessons that we can draw from, so that we can build and strengthen our funding mechanisms and pathways for the kind of work that needs to get done, not just acutely, but for the chronic problems that you're talking about. Michelle, we need to take a small break, but stay on the line. I definitely want to talk to you some more, and thank you very much for joining us. This is Dr. America Show, and we have been talking with Dr. Michelle Nisarenko.
Great.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
All right, thank you for coming back. This is the Dr. America Show. My name is Sanjeev Sriram. I'm your host, and we have been having the pleasure of talking to Dr. Michelle Nisarenko about the Ebola outbreak and the challenges that it has put on the people of West Africa. And we are learning a lot about West African public health infrastructures and the challenges that those good people are facing over there. So, Michelle, one of the things that I found kind of interesting was that the World Health Organization recently declared that Nigeria and Senegal were free of the Ebola virus because there have been no new cases of the disease in the past 6 weeks, meaning that no one has died or caught Ebola in those countries for that time period. Some in the global health community are seeing this as a success story. Do you mind commenting on how they accomplished this feat? And, from your vantage point, do you think Sierra Leone, Guinea, or Liberia will be free of the disease, and what kind of time frame they might be looking at?
Yeah, so I actually spent part of August in Nigeria and then returned from Senegal just a couple days ago on some other unrelated work. And, when I compare being in Nigeria or being in Senegal to when I'm in Liberia, it's almost like being in a different part of the world.
Wow.
There's more infrastructure, there's more organization, there's, just when you look around, there's buildings, there's roads, people have cars readily accessible. There's not an air of frustration or loss or lacking there. They often blame just being uncoordinated or unstructured or unplanned. They don't blame what's missing is not often stuff. It's often skill or organization. And so the difference is like night and day. And so it's not surprising to me that they were able to effectively quarantine, identify, treat, and isolate people far better. I think the human resources system organization is just 10 to 20 years ahead of Liberia and Sierra Leone and Guinea.
Wow. And I mean, and just to give us a geography reminder, just how far apart are these countries? Because it's very interesting to hear that there's such a staggering difference.
Yeah, so Senegal is about a 45-minute flight from Monrovia. You can't drive from Liberia to Senegal, and you can't drive from Sierra Leone. There's a small country of the Gambia in between. But they're relatively close, and there's a lot of mobility in that region. There's a lot of trading. Goods need to be brought in different port areas. There's a lot of fishing and fishing boat movement along the coast. So especially between Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, With Nigeria, they share no borders with any of the other affected countries, but they're a major flight hub for West Africa, simply because they're so developed and they have the infrastructure for good airports in Lagos and in Abuja.
Gotcha. I'm glad that you're able to kind of like help us paint this picture, and if you don't mind adding to that picture and describe what is it like to be a health aid worker in West Africa. We hear about doctors and nurses coming back to the United States, and we seem to surround them with our hysteria and our fear, but we don't really have a good grasp on what their day-to-day is like. They have been to these parts of the world, just like you're describing, to take care of people with malaria and HIV and malnutrition, and many of them are putting their own health at risk. Do you mind taking us through a day in the life of one of these workers, and what keeps them or you motivated when the problem seems so daunting?
Yeah, I think that for us pre-Ebola, we arrive every morning. Our team of nurses there, our Liberian nurses, have worked all night, and they've kept all the kids stable. We have at the main hospital in Monrovia, we have capacity for about 100 children and babies overnight, and the total number of nurses taking care of those 100 children is about 7, and there's 1 doctor for the on-call intern for the night. And so when we arrive in the morning, those hardworking folks have done their best to keep everyone cared for, treat new patients, deal with the emergencies that happen overnight. And so when you arrive in the morning, it's often a catch-up challenge because new patients are flowing in, sick patients from overnight need more care, and there's limited bodies to do it even during the day. So we have a dedicated pediatric ER, and we often have up to 30, maybe 35 children there, with just 3 nurses during the day, which is a 1 to 10 or more ratio, and then often just 1, maybe 2 doctors. And so it's a challenging environment normally. 1 month we'll have 1 antibiotic, the next month we'll run out, we'll have a different one. And so routinely the work is challenging, and it's a hard environment. But I think what happens is, kids with simple problems get the simple care they need. So pneumonia gets antibiotics and it gets better. And malaria gets antimalarials and they get better. So a kid that had a seizure and was in a coma on the first day could be running around the 3rd day.
Wow.
And it's like night and day, and it's so gratifying. You see the impact before your very eyes in a way that's far, far larger in scale than we see in the U.S. Because the degree of sickness with which people come in is often so much worse than the U.S. that when you have that dramatic of an effect, it keeps you going. And I think it sustains the local healthcare workers because they see these kids getting better. They come back as well children. It builds community. We have tons of families who just come to visit us, actually, at the hospital, to show us their kids are growing and to, check in. So I think that regular health system is really what motivates people. I think for the Ebola treatment units, I personally have not worked in one myself, but when I work with, the folks who have, I've been at the CDC training program, the folks there, I think, experience the same thing we're experiencing. People come in incredibly sick in a time of need that we as healers and physicians and nurses and healthcare workers are drawn to take care of, and that when they have the recovery, which is now 50% often of patients, that to see those patients walk out of the unit after that long struggle and to have their families there or to have the staff able to hug them without the equipment on, the spacesuits, and to be able to have that interaction, I think is what keeps them going. The losses are hard, but the saves are like moving mountains.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You and I are both pediatricians, so I think we are naturally biased to prioritizing child health. One of the heartbreaking trends that I've been reading about, and I don't know whether it's gotten its proper course of attention, is that the children who become orphans, because their family members have died of Ebola. Have you heard much about this problem, and can you share with us your whatever you might know about the kinds of supports that are there for those kids?
So I think that support is now slowly coming. I haven't heard much about specific organizations launching larger scale activities around that, but a lot of the health institutions are taking in kids. The nurses and the families that work at the hospitals are taking in kids that are orphans, or they're getting orphan kids together in groups. It's a really challenging problem, and I think it's important to point out that kids are not losing parents just from Ebola, but also from the diseases that can't be treated right now in Liberia or Sierra Leone due to the collapse of the healthcare system.
No, that's a really helpful point to remind us about. I want to switch gears a tiny bit, and I heard that there was a major development for your work in Liberia and the University of Massachusetts. I'd love for you to be able to tell us about it, and are the goals and objectives focused on just Ebola, or are there plans for a long-term trajectory of development?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we're the University of Massachusetts, and then my home institution, Boston Children's Hospital, as well as the rest of our academic collaborators, including the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and their logistics department, are all working together normally in Liberia. And so in this crisis, we came together to say, how could we help? What could we do? We have such deep knowledge of how things work, people, of our contacts, and people who are suffering. And so we came together and we actually put together a proposal that was supported by the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation in his announcement last week. And we'll be tackling 3 different aims with this proposal. And our first aim is to really help get workforce on the ground for Ebola treatment. We talked earlier about the bottlenecks of people and the fear, as well as the need for long support. So this deployment requires you to be in country for 4 weeks, but then also to not return to U.S. hospitals for 21 days. And so I know I have a very nice boss, and he probably let me go. but in general, that's 7 weeks is a lot to ask of any physician without pay, or any nurse especially, who get limited academic or protected time. And so our first aim will actually be partnering with the NGOs to support the costs related to onboarding expat staff, but also to help offset supporting local staff, so that we're adding to the volume of sanitation workers they have, burial teams as part of the Ebola treatments, as well as then nursing and local physicians' assistants, so that they can maintain the running of the treatment centers with enough staff to keep them safe for both the workers and the patients. And that's our first aim. Our second aim is actually to take on this public health infrastructure a little bit. And what we'll be doing is coupling the CDC's infection prevention and control training for regular facilities with our local colleagues, physicians, medical students, nurses, and they'll be working in teams, and we'll be deploying them to the existing hospitals, both in Monrovia and in the districts, with a 3-month supply of general protective equipment. And so right now in Liberia, we wouldn't necessarily wear gloves to put in an IV. Okay. Or we wouldn't necessarily wear a mask in the operating room, which would seem crazy to anybody in the United States, because those supplies don't exist in sufficient quantity to make it possible. And so we're going to be providing each facility with enough supplies to be able to take infection prevention training and apply it in their facility, so that they can easily identify Ebola patients who present and send them to the treatment unit, but then open and allow the other patients in to receive the care they're not receiving right now. And so, for example, there's virtually no surgery in the city of Monrovia, which is 1.5 million people. And so if you have a car accident and you break your leg, if you have appendicitis, you can't be cared for. And so we want to change that ability by teaching the local hospitals and facilities how to protect themselves and provide the equipment needed, since those two things are what's lacking. And so we'll be working with a lot of partners to do that, ranging from the Ministry of Health to long-term supply chain development and the CDC. And then our third aim is developing more laboratory and transfusion capacity for the country. So adding equipment for testing, training for local laboratory workers to make more of a blood bank available.
Okay, wow, this is fantastic work. I'm so glad that we've got the kinds of people doing these kinds of efforts, because I think this will mean so much for the people of Liberia. But I think this is also kind of America actually sharing its best with parts of the world that sometimes and too often get neglected. I'm just really, really, glad to hear about a lot of this. For our listeners who are interested in following your work, how should they go about doing that? If anybody is interested in donating money or making supporting you guys financially, are there ways of doing that?
Yeah, so we have a foundation through the University of Massachusetts Med School that folks can donate online, and that money would go to our relief effort. The majority of it is to fill the gap in funding for supply, which is the main constraint right now. And so they'd be able to contribute if they want to that way. And I can send you the link to post on your website, or I can read it off here in just a second. And then as far as following our work, we have a website off the UMass website as well, and then we'll be blogging and working with some local media to share what we're doing, the progress we're making, so that people can follow our work.
Fantastic. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for talking with us today and giving us such a whirlwind of perspective that I think has been sorely missed from all the discussions about Ebola. And thank you for all the amazing work. Please convey our thanks to your teammates and to your colleagues, both stateside and in Africa. We wish you guys all the very, very, very best. And thank you guys so much for all that you do. And thanks for talking to us today.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right. And we will be right back with more talk about Ebola on this side of the ocean. Stay tuned. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
All right. Thank you guys very much for coming back to the Dr. America show. Again, I want to thank Dr. Michelle Nesarenko for her time and giving us such a valuable perspective on how Ebola is playing out in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. And I think that with that, we kind of are able to sort of direct our concerns towards the people for whom this disease has put the most burden, and to kind of bring the conversation back to the United States. I think it's important to kind of look at where our caution for Ebola is taking us. From my perspective, I think caution is pretty broad. It ranges from the science-based to the fear-based. And, some people seem to think that there is no such thing as too much caution. And if a little bit of caution is good, then a whole lot of caution must be even better, right? Better safe than sorry. But, let me tell you, things like travel bans and now these quarantines in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Minnesota, I'm concerned that they're going to make us more sorry than safe. And, the thing about excessive caution is that it stops being, based in science and it starts being based in fear. And it's important to kind of distinguish the two because, science-based caution saves lives. Fear-based caution creates this illusion of security, but it can have some serious consequences. To talk about this a little bit more, I am thrilled to have with me our program director over here at We Act Radio, Kimon. How you doing?
Hey, peace and blessings, Dr. America. So glad to have you here joining the We Act Radio Network.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this. So I think some of the things about caution that I kind of want to explore on this segment of the program is really where our science-based caution ends and our fear-based caution starts to kind of begin. And I think things have gotten kind of murky between the two. I think it helps to kind of remind listeners about some of the facts about the Ebola virus. Fact: it can only be transmitted through contact with specific bodily fluids. Fact: a person infected with Ebola must have symptoms in order to be contagious. No symptoms means not contagious. Fact: the most contagious patients with Ebola are the ones who have been suffering with the most symptoms for the most amount of time. So, and I don't know if all of those facts are making it to the public. What do you think?
Well, I first want to say that we obviously need to acknowledge that there has been several countries who have been declared Ebola free because they haven't had any new cases on the past 6 weeks, Nigeria and others. So their efforts have been fruitful in terms of combating this. That needs to be said. But to push back a little bit, you need to understand that at the same time, there is it's not like it's unheard of a biological warfare. So a lot of people have been concerned with this. Anything that comes out of Africa is to be scrutinized in terms of Western powers. But with that said, I think that this quote from the great Damian Wayans from the past classic comedy show Living Color, and I do say comedy show because oftentimes in American media, comedians tell more truths than our politicians do, and there's a viral image of him that from a previous episode that's been going around, and I just want to read it to you here. This is Damian Wayans from Living Color. It says, "Never allow the man to ebolatize or vaccinize your mucous membrane, thus allowing him to inject his spermicidal lubrication to eradicate, or shall I say exterminate, the people who melanate." All right. So people are lashing on the fact that he said ebolatize. This was in the 90s. This when this was said. So there's a lot of there's a lot to be said about the fear tactics in terms of this, but we do need to understand that it is a significant amount of concern or suspicion rather whenever we see a questionable tactics being applied to issues such as this, because as I said earlier to you off before the show, that you can't come into this country with fruit from other countries, but yet people seem to been allowed to self what do you call it, the entire being separated from society in terms of their contagious symptoms. Whether they got the symptoms or not, they're still deemed contagious until it's 21 days incubation period. Right. So they have to be. So they've been allowed to self quarantine. Right. But that self quarantine practice hasn't been working. And as I said to you off camera, I think that they should be allowed, because we have sequestered juries. People are locked in hotels and separated from their families, and that's for the pursuit of justice. This is a healthcare issue that has potential of becoming a domestic incident biologically, but that same approach has not been applied. So these are questions that need to be answered, and I think that they are valid and concerns for public safety. I think that you brought up a lot of great points, and I feel that the transparency of the public health efforts that are happening both here and overseas has probably been lacking. I think that one of the things that probably would help the most is if we had like eyewitness to what the kinds of screenings are happening in West African exit ports, when patients when passengers are put through customs and security screenings. Most Americans when they travel within this country, they're familiar with they take off their shoes, they remove the electronics from their bag, they take out all their
toiletries and put it in a large Ziploc bag. And so they know what the procedures are. They know what those procedures are connected to in terms of, policy and current event developments and things like that. But we have not, very, 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 very few Americans have real life experience with what is similarly happening in places like, Liberia, and places like, in many West African countries that really are, quite effective at keeping sick passengers from, boarding airplanes. And it's unfortunate that we don't have that kind of transparency, because I think that there would be some reassurance, maybe not a whole lot, but some, if people had, some perspective on that. When it comes to the quarantine, and whether it needs to be, a mandatory state quarantine versus some of the self-voluntary quarantines that, groups like Doctors Without Borders and now the CDC are recommending, I think that, it's the question that I raise with let me break those two up. Okay, the self-quarantine, the voluntary self-quarantine, it works. I think that it will work from what the CDC is now recommending, where the person has to stay at home, monitor their symptoms, and they're going to talk twice a day to a health official, somebody with some training, with some background in public health and with contagion management. I think that is actually protective of the public. And I think that is, those are recommendations that are based off of an abundance of caution, that is research based.
I'm for that. If there's no one in the home with them, I think that would suffice. You had, of course, someone, a squad car rotating shifts outside to make sure they don't leave the home. I think that would be sufficient. But if there are other people in the home, then they should be in a sequestered environment, or like I said before prior to the beginning of the show, that perhaps be in a hotel room service and until the 21 days has passed.
Right.
We living in a country where we have National Defense Authorization Acts where anyone can be held for without charge for an indefinite period of time. But then all of a sudden we are concerned about human rights when it pertains to health issues. And like in the movie Outbreak, and I understand the CDC is not a law enforcement agency; they don't have the powers to block orders and what have you. But I would argue that in these instances that they should have the power to quarantine people, not torture camp. Not torture camps, but definitely quarantine people when they potentially pose a threat to the general health of the public. And right. Again, I just want to push back quickly is that the black people, and this is of course coming from West Africa, this is an issue of particular concern to black people, because health concerns in terms of a government protocol and procedures have always been an issue with us, from the Tuskegee experiments to the Native Americans and small pox infected blankets. But so there is a history of concern in terms of a government agency and the issue of public safety when it comes to biological warfare. So that is a historical baggage
right.
that these issues carry with them.
Right.
And I don't think it's inappropriate to include those and acknowledge those in people's apprehensiveness
right.
and fear and concerns of how to deal with this.
And I think one of the things that you're bringing up, and I think that it's actually a very important distinction between a voluntary home quarantine, okay, versus a mandatory state, state-imposed quarantine, is the concept of whether we're going to treat, caregivers with compassion, or are we going to treat them with criminality? Because in the last couple of days with Nurse Casey Hickox in New Jersey, this woman had passed screening in West Africa. Had followed through with all of the protocols set by the group Doctors Without Borders with whom she was working. And then she arrives in New Jersey. She was asymptomatic. She had no symptoms, She, despite having no symptoms, just based off of her travel history, was kept in isolated rooms for hours at a time. And then when she was moved from the airport to the hospital, She was escorted with 8 police cars with sirens and lights going off. And to me, like, that sends such a unfortunate and unnecessary message that this woman is being treated like a criminal.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that that's necessary. Like, that's the thing where, like, I kind of feel that what that course of action does is that it validates fear in a very, very harmful sense, and it stigmatizes people who have been selfless.
Well, again, that's a reflection of American, law enforcement, because there's always extremes. That is unfortunate and completely unnecessary. I think that these healthcare workers, particularly organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, are modern-day heroes. They are putting their lives in jeopardy, literally putting their lives in jeopardy for the better good and for their fellow man. And so I want to honor them and respect them, and I think they should be compensated and treated with courtesy and dignity. And again, I do not think that quarantine should take that form. I don't think that it should be punitive. I think that they should be, in a decent hotel with room service and not locked in a rubber room. I think they should be afforded compensation for their times during their quarantines. I think that they should not have to suffer financially because of their quarantine. Again, I think we should learn from the histories of lessons of history. But these are, this is when we don't have clear, defined protocols and procedures in place. It leaves up to local, interpretations and discretions, and that is where we have problems, because unfortunately, this country is one of inequality and equity, and that treatment will reflect that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that's been very tough for this public to understand is that they're also not really getting a full perspective on the on the scientific facts as they arise. Like, things that should be reassuring messages to this public are not being publicized enough. I think just to give you an example, with Thomas Eric Duncan, the Liberian gentleman who came to Dallas and fell ill and ultimately died, I think it's particularly worth noting that his fiance, and everyone in the apartment building in which he lived all tested negative for Ebola. Now, the reason why I think that that's a reassuring message, to the public, is that is consistent with the science that we've been hearing from people like, Dr. Tom Frieden and Dr. Anthony Fauci, both, Dr. Frieden's from the CDC and Dr. Fauci is from the National Institutes of Health. When they have been trying to educate us that this, virus is not as easy to catch as it's being made to sound. I think our real life lived experience is consistent with that, and I think it's unfortunate that we're not getting to hear that that side of what we're learning from these real life experiences with Ebola.
These real life experiences are not part of American education. Unfortunately, the American education leaves a lot to be wanted. People are unfamiliar with the history of contagious diseases in this country, and we don't need to go any further than look back into influenza and the measles and how those diseases were transmitted and how that was dealt with. In fact, I would like to take this opportunity to point out the fact that I think it was polio was the last full vaccine that was made available to everyone. And the gentleman that created that vaccine, discovered that vaccine, he was directly questioned on why wasn't he selling that? Why was he giving this away for free?
Dr. Jonas Salk.
That's right. He was a hero, and I think that speaks volumes to the profitizing of our healthcare industry. I mean that has to be said, because that's a part and parcel of with some of the problems that we're dealing with in this issue. But with that said, I think that people need to be concerned more so with everyday diseases and challenges that are costing lives every day. I mean, on the continent of Africa, more people die in the continent of Africa and Latin America and on certain other third world countries. People die from a lack of access to fresh water every day than any of the Ebola cases combined, and that's every day. But the threat the fear, the possibility of American, God forbid, American lives being threatened because people place a very higher value on those lives. That is the 400-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
Because now we're saying, oh, well, what's happening over there is unfortunate, but if it was to come here,
right,
and visit our shores and what have you. But at the same time, I think it's been a lackadaisical approach to stopping it at the borders, and I think that we have a double consideration in terms of people's rights, depending on who they are and where they are on the social status in this country. And I think that we need to really take a holistic approach to stemming the possibility of not just this disease or any other contagious disease that can be spread, because we are very high transportation society. People move around the globe quickly and easily. Somebody was in China today, could be in DC tomorrow, and vice versa. So those movies that we've seen before were art imitates life and life imitates art, from the movie Contagions to Outbreak. These have painted a picture in people's minds, and I think that we can take some lessons in terms of how to make our borders a little less porous in terms of these healthcare issues.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up some of the other contagious diseases that that we're facing as Americans, and I like to kind of point out that we're in the middle of flu season right now, and there's about 200,000 Americans who are hospitalized every year with the flu, and depending on the strain of flu virus that we're dealing with, anywhere from 3 to 40,000 Americans lose their life to flu every year. And I have enough faith in the public health community that Ebola will not reach those kinds of numbers for Americans. But we have this known disease, the flu, and only 46% of Americans get a flu vaccine. But we don't seem to approach things like flu with the same kind of panic. Last year, there was an outbreak of measles in Newark, Texas. And, Newark is not that far from Dallas, where Ebola showed up. But in Newark, Texas last summer, there was 21 cases of measles from people not vaccinating, themselves or their kids. And, and these are, these things happen, but, nobody's talking about travel bans to Newark, Texas, and nobody's talking about quarantining those people. No,
that's America.
Right. But if you look at what measles was doing in the 1950s at the same time that, Dr. Jonas Salk was trying to help us out with polio. Prior to the measles vaccine, there were, about 1,000 people, suffering from brain damage and deafness because they, survived measles, but they, suffered. And, I think that for, to fast forward to the 21st century and to see people, not, take basic precautions against, such a preventable, disease, to me is, I find that, very, I find that depressingly interesting, when I compare that to how we're responding to Ebola.
I find it depressingly interesting in preparation for this interview, and we welcome again to have Dr. America joining the We Act Radio Networks. Finally, we have a doctor in the house. But I found it depressingly interesting that we have an Ebola czar, but not a Surgeon General.
Oh, tell me about it. So, the thing about the Ebola czar is that I actually would have preferred if this administration had reminded the American people and had reminded the members of Congress that if you want an Ebola czar, somebody with an MD and with an ability to communicate with the public, that's exactly what the Surgeon General does. That's part of the job description. And right now, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was nominated a year ago, has still not been confirmed as our Surgeon General because he had the quote unquote audacity to say that gun violence is a public health issue. And that created a.
Now, what was the pushback on that? What what possibly could be a lucid pushback on that statement?
I mean, it's fascinating to me that people found that to be a threat to, to the Second Amendment, when in fact that is the same position. Like what Dr. Murthy said, that, gun violence is a public health issue. That is the same position that everybody from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Family Physicians, emergency room doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, like every major medical organization, has stated the exact same thing and has been saying that same thing for decades now. Dr. Murthy just happened to tweet it, and for that, he is, being held back from this really, really important job that we have right now, the Surgeon General. And that's like we were saying before, depressingly interesting.
Depressingly interesting. All right. So you're Dr. America, and we're glad to again finally have a doctor in the house on the We Act Radio Network. What is your diagnosis for this situation in terms of what should be done? Because I feel as though that they are not listening to reason, and they're definitely in need of some help.
Well, I first off I would like to hope that that Governor Christie can get in touch with Nurse Hickox and apologize for
There's a long list of people he needs to apologize to, but he can start there.
He can start there. I think that apologizing for because it is not a crime to care.
Absolutely not.
And I mean, to see what she endured, I think was, maybe that's in the tradition of, the criminal justice system. That is not in the tradition of public health. And I think that, apologizing to her would be a good acknowledgement that, we do not criminalize our heroes who, risk their lives to go and take care of others. I think that, we need to, maybe like all of us, need to really kind of work on our science and health literacy. I think that it's, really tough to understand some of these like complex health issues when, in general, we seem to, only listen to industry when it comes time to get a science lesson. And I think that, this is kind of a good wake-up call to the average Americans that, maybe we need to kind of start finding venues for learning about health, and hopefully the Dr. America show can be one of those venues. But yeah, I think that, it's a great time to go to the CDC's website, do your own digging and exploring. Learn, ask questions. They have a Twitter account, they have a Facebook page. I think it's, a great idea to, try to, engage in curiosity and conversation. But overall, I think the prognosis is good. I'm optimistic that we are going to beat this thing. We are the home of the brave. We are going to start acting like it. We can do better. We must do better. I think that people like Dr. Michelle Nesterenko, represent the best of what we can do when it comes to things like Ebola outbreaks, and I think that we will prevail over this.
Again, and I think I've benefited enough from this conversation to say that I no longer support blanket quarantines. I think, again, it should not have been punitive, and what the nurse endured is unacceptable, and she definitely deserves to be compensated and apologized to by the Governor Christie of New Jersey. But I think that we do need to acknowledge that the contempt for masquerading caution, this that has created the racial profiling, stand your ground laws, and everything is their fear mongering and such. So I benefited from that in terms of this conversation with the Dr. America. So glad to have you again here join us on We Act Radio Network. But I think that people should definitely look to you as a third party and a consultant on this issue, so they can get information and information that they may not be getting from the corporate media that has a vested interest in the continuation of this fear mongering.
Thanks a lot, Kamon. I'm really excited to keep having conversations about things like this, which just as you said, I think that there's a lot of fear mongering out there that I think it takes advantage of people's ignorance and gives us some really dangerous policies out there, whether that's punitive quarantines or stand your ground or voter suppression and voter ID laws. I think that we have to kind of remind ourselves that we do have these things called science and research and evidence that they don't tell us that we live in a world with zero risk, but they can tell us how to get to as close to zero risk as possible, and maybe kind of help us tell apart real fears and real threats from the fictional ones.
Absolutely, and I still say that the greatest disease known to man is ignorance, and it is too highly contagious and deadly.
All right. Well, when we come back from the break, let's try to have a couple of closing thoughts, and and thank you very much.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
All right. Thank you for staying in tune with us at the Dr. America Show. We've had a really fascinating episode today talking about Ebola. I think that I want to thank again Dr. Michelle Nisarenko for walking us through what the public health infrastructures have been like in West Africa, and how this disease has really affected people living there and struggling with it. I'm hoping that conversation kind of helps our listeners and our viewers, redirect their concern towards, where this threat is its worst. And I want to thank Kimon Freeman for his time as well, and for that great discussion about where does caution maybe cross the line from being science-based to fear-based, and how maybe we can keep that in check as we respond to the specter of Ebola in America. I've had a great time with today's episode. I hope you guys did too, and I'm looking forward to having these kinds of conversations. I think Ebola is a great reminder, and I think that the conversations that we had today really showed that America's the home of the brave. We can act like it. We can do better. We must do better. And because I believe in We Act Radio's concept of do something, we're going to in the coming days we will try to put together a list of resources at the We Act Radio website, so that folks are interested in donating to groups that are participating overseas to alleviate the suffering can learn more, donate, get involved that way, and perhaps stateside we can start putting some pressure on our political leaders to follow the science, follow the evidence, and do a better job of educating the rest of us about what's really going on and how it's working out with Ebola. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I'm looking forward to future episodes where we explore salud and its many dimensions of health and wellness and public health accomplishments. My name is Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, and it's been a pleasure talking with you guys. Thanks a lot. Until next time, salud to your health.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.